Yeah, yeah, it was gutting. Like I was pretty crushed to not get it because especially I felt like I was hard done by. I felt like it was an individual's I guess, view of me that is what made me miss it. I think because around the time when the event was not being run to, high standard, I guess, and that was open to the community discussion to have that, I was outspoken about it. And I think that very much put a hurt in me. So, I'm sure we'll talk about that Twitter and stuff later and what like having a voice versus being careful of not stepping on the toes of your tournament organizers. That was an interesting dynamic. So I thought I'd definitely fucked it at the start by burning that relationship.
If you don't know who Conky is, I'm surprised you clicked on this video, but well, he's an Australian Counter-Strike and Valorant caster. He's a streamer, sometimes a tournament organizer. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit later on. And also, by day job, I think you're an insurance salesman. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. So a broker, so businesses will come to me and I'll help them place their insurance program. So.
Wow, sounds like fun. Maybe not as fun as esports, but look, that is who you are. But I think there's a lot more to really, I guess who you are as a caster and as talent. I think that's probably what we're mostly going to be focusing on as we go through your history. But I wanted to start it way back in the beginning. All right, we go way back here. This is 15 years ago. All right, so Conky, Surfer Conky, as he's known back then, makes a YouTube channel. All right. And there's various surfing related videos. You've even got one actually that's got 560,000 views currently. So I don't know if you knew that, but that's actually pretty crazy.
I do. I think that was in the era where it was just like I see, those like highlight videos or something like that, something silly, and I was just like, I could throw that together. Windows Movie Maker, and then all of a sudden, I still get comments on it. Like I get random emails being like, "Oh yeah, this new comments." Oh, okay.
that is exactly what it was. The 10 greatest barrels in surfing. So that was sick. I watched that. I thought it was great. Great content. So I kind of wanted to start here because this was like, I suppose, the start of you as an online personality or your internet persona, so to speak. But back then, were you ever really thinking about anything? I mean, I don't think anyone, when they started doing YouTube 15 years ago in 2008, were thinking 15 years in ahead. But what were your thoughts when you started making this YouTube channel? Were you just doing it for fun? Was it just like I don't know, how old you were, like maybe a teenage dream sort of thing or something like that?
Yeah, it was like I remember seeing this video, which was kind of a parody on a genre of music called grindcore, which is just like the very like brrr sort of garbage, and it was basically putting up pictures over like words of what you thought they were saying, and I was like, that's really funny. I could make one of those. So that was my very first YouTube upload, and that actually did somewhat okay. And I remember making another one as well, but it was just super silly. Like that was the kind of YouTube era back then. You just make these really, really basic Windows Movie Maker cookie cutter videos, and that was kind of what the funny stuff was. So I never saw any like future in it. I just thought it'd be a funny thing to do one day. And yeah, to my surprise, it actually got a little bit of traction. And then I made like a couple of little random surfing videos. I was a little surf rat back in the day when I was growing up. So that's sort of where that did. But nothing really from there. It was just very much the basic stuff, and I didn't really think too much of it in the early days.
All right, well, talk to me about Guitar Hero, because that's sort of where you went next. I've really scrolled through the depths of your YouTube channel, and I've gone all the way back to the very first video. A lot of it was surfing, and then it went from surfing into a lot of Guitar Hero. I'm talking like there's like 30 or 40 just Guitar Hero montages or something. My favorite one was 3 Guys, 1 Guitar, something like that. You and a couple of friends or something were playing some solo Guitar Hero, trying to I don't know, do it on Master or something. There's like literally 4 years worth of Guitar Hero videos. So what's the deal with Guitar Hero? Why is that such a big thing?
I think it's like, I remember playing it. We had one of those nights at school where it was like a sleepover thing or whatever in like year 8 or year 9. And people brought a bunch of consoles and games and, stuff to do that was fun and entertaining or whatever, and stayed up late and did that. One of the people brought Guitar Hero. I think it was Guitar Hero 1 on the PS2. I can't remember exactly, or Guitar Hero 2 maybe. But I remember playing that and being like, this is sick. And I was playing real guitar at the time, just very entry level, with an instructor at my school. And I became pretty quickly obsessed with Guitar Hero. Parents bought Guitar Hero 3 on the PS2 for me for Christmas one year, and that was probably their biggest regret ever, because it became a very, very big focus of mine. I just loved it. Like I actually stopped playing real guitar as a result of it, I think, which is really, really strange. But it was just really good. I'm a perfectionist, I guess, by nature. So the whole thing of like 100% completing the song was quite a drive to me. And it was relatively easy to improve over time. You know, I sort of have a feeling that I've always had a bit of a attraction to rhythm style games. So, you know, when the drums came out, I got them and all that kind of stuff. So I had a lot of fun with that, but I got pretty good pretty quick. And I think it was 2009, it must have been. I actually had my first ever like LAN event where I won a local event here. It was like a regional one, then a state one in Guitar Hero at the time zone. Do you remember the time zone machine that had your Guitar Hero?
Yeah.
So it was that. And then the winner of that, the regional, I came first in WA. I got to fly over to the Gold Coast to play in the Nationals when I was 16.
Of course, the Guitar Hero National Champs of 2009 was at the Gold Coast. I can't think of a better venue than that.
Yeah, so Surfers Paradise. My mum came over and I was the only one, I guess, that was wearing like board shorts. Everyone else was very underground, grunge looking, and I was probably one of the youngest there. So mum was like a little bit overwhelmed when she took me over there, but I ended up coming third. And that was really just sort of something that fizzed out. And then as the games, like when you basically complete the games that are on console, Guitar Hero ultimately came to PC and you could put in custom songs. So people would make, you know, obnoxiously hard songs and just put in some like random like buzzy audio in Fruity Loops or something just to match up with the notes. So over time, I just kept like sing that, and ultimately like it was always hard to gauge how good you were compared to the rest of the world, but there was a relatively like cool community that was, you know, maybe a couple hundred strong, and I would be maybe in the top 50 or something in the world from roughly of what we were sort of doing. So that was where the YouTubing sort of came along. I saw people doing it, of course, like and then I started recording my stuff with some sort of like slide or flip phone, like sitting up looking at my TV, and then I would start filming that. Yeah.
So this is actually the direction I was going to go into next, and you know, not necessarily for Guitar Hero, but I saw you started to upload some Call of Duty stuff, and a lot of that was with your phone or whatever it was, a camcorder or something. You know, really badly framed, you know, kind of footage that you were just playing on your TV and recording on your phone or something like that. So you went from Guitar Hero to Call of Duty, it seems like, and I think when you know, again, and these are all assumptions I'm making from looking at your YouTube channel and your history. When you started playing Modern Warfare 2, I think it was, that's kind of when you started thinking about content more so rather than just like uploading random shit. It was like, I'm starting to stream a little bit here. I could see you talking about like, you know, doing like quote unquote commentaries, not in a capacity that we would call commentary now, but like YouTube commentaries of your gameplay and stuff like that. You know, talking to people who are watching. I don't know how many viewers you had at that point in time, but you know, hey guys, this is what I want to do with the channel and like this year, and that kind of stuff. So it seemed like, you know, I don't know how long this probably took, up to about maybe 2013, 2014. This is kind of where this started to happen. But it's been like, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of you uploading, and now you're kind of getting to the point where you're thinking about content. And I sort of thought that was kind of an interesting little transition to go through. But the one thing that kind of struck my mind, which was a video in 2014, I saw you were wearing a CLG jersey, right? So to me, that was the first moment where I was like, okay, he's into esports at this point. But what was actually the first kind of, you know, penny dropping for you when it comes to esports? Was it, you know, were you just a big CLG fan? I don't know what game it was, whatever it was, but where did that all sort of come together?
I'll roll you through that because it is an interesting transition out, like sort of through Call of Duty. Call of Duty was very toxic, like very, very toxic. You think about, you know, people talking about whatever happens in Valorant or League or whatever today, but back then it was just a whole nother beast. You know, I know it's sort of a stupid thing to be like, you wouldn't survive in Modern Warfare 2. It's not like that at all, but it was just, everyone was just really kind of mean and all that kind of thing. And in the content creation space, there was a lot of doxing, there was swatting, there was all this garbage in the very, very early days. And so I eventually, like, my whole progression through YouTube was I was sort of building it up myself. So I was just working a job in a restaurant on the side, and kind of like not really sure what the hell I wanted to do. I just finished high school, kind of looking at uni potentially, that sort of stuff. And I just was obsessed. Like, I had a friend tell me to buy Call of Duty 4. So I bought that and I was sort of playing that. And then I started learning how to snipe. And then you saw FaZe Clan doing all these trick shots and all that kind of stuff. And then they're making like montages of their frags or highlights. And then, you know, people started doing commentary, which is just over gameplay talking about whatever topic. So that's sort of where I went. But yeah, around that 2014 part, it was having a really, really bad effect on my mental health, just with how terminally online I was. And very much, yeah, all the comments kind of living in my head rent free, I guess you would say. So I stepped back a little bit and I ultimately got introduced to League of Legends. So that's where the CLG realm comes along. If anyone remembers the Rush Hour bot lane, double lift and Afro move from the NALCS. So that was my jam. I remember buying a CLG jersey that went on pre-order for like 5 months or something before it finally arrived. But yeah, League was very much my first entry level. I think it was like season 2 League or something like that, watching competitive. And I was very, very obsessed from season 3 onwards with the LCK, the Korean circuit.
Yeah, I mean, I was actually super into League at the same time, and I was a CLG fan as well. I don't know if, this is an aside, but was it because like TSM was like the big brand, and I was like, I don't want to support the big brand that everyone's a fan of. I want to support the other team. So that's why I was a CLG fan.
Yeah, I loved Afromu more so. Like, he was my favorite. Right. I played support a little bit because it was very much the thing of my mates being better, and I'd just be like, I'll pick up Thresh or whatever and play around with that. And Double Lift was like, you know, that cocky kind of arrogant guy that was very easy to follow along with when he won, but it also made it very painful when they lost.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll skip ahead a little bit. Obviously, you know, you go through this period where you're into Modern Warfare 2 and you're playing that and blah, blah, blah. And I want to jump to the point where Counter-Strike is released, because obviously that's been the bulk of your career. So I think, was it like 2015, you said, when you started getting involved in Counter-Strike? So we actually got to see the first couple of YouTube videos as well of yours in 2015. I think the very first CS one was you got a 4K on Inferno with a Tech-9. And it was like, it was really nothing. It was like such a piss round. Like, it was okay, I guess, but like it was really nothing special.
Yeah.
But so talk to me about picking up CS and going from, you know, CS to casting CS, because I want to go quickly into like you casting and starting off in CGM. But what was it like before then? Did you try to sort of play in a competitive team? What were you playing a lot of Counter-Strike? How was that sort of whole thing leading into your casting prior to the casting?
Yeah, for sure. I think like I remember watching just like online events, obviously, you know, watching people play Pro CS, the early VP days and early Navi and all that kind of stuff, which was really, really exciting. But it was the group of friends that I was playing League of Legends with. That friend group actually almost fell apart because of rank 5s, which was a little bit rough. Wow. So we ended up moving over to CS with the ones who sort of remained. And then I ended up just playing matchmaking with a bunch of friends over that period. Ultimately ended up being like Haz and Scoot and Dream, those guys, which were my core friend group, who are still good friends of mine today. And just, constantly playing matchmaking, trying to get up to the higher ranks. I think it was, we got to like Eagle or something at some point, but it was all just around that. And we became super obsessed with watching the competitions because they were so exciting. So it was kind of even, around maybe like super early immunity days. And I wasn't really super in the know about anything oceanic or anything Australian at the time. It was very much like the overseas stuff. And then I think somewhere in the interim around then, obviously I tried to play like, you know, CGA and that kind of stuff, but wasn't really very good, in my opinion. And then I found that a bunch of friends ended up, I remember, I think I got introduced by a non-gaming friend's brother who was playing CS into the WA scene. So there was the Red Flag LAN, the RF LAN that used to run, I think it was 3 or 4 times a year sort of thing. And he convinced me at BYC LAN, very similar to like, what is it, the Respawn and Frag Zone and all those kind of stuff. So you bring your PC and play the LAN, and there was little competitions that sort of went in and there. So I found my way into the WA scene, and that's really kind of where it started to spur me forward.
Right. So you're obviously playing a fair bit, but then talk to me about how you get into casting, because, you know, I think if I look at your YouTube stuff, it sort of always seemed like you were pretty interested in like, you know, making videos, doing content, talking about stuff, blah, blah, blah. So it seems like a fairly natural transition. It's not like, you know, you've gone from being a player and then there's this slot on the broadcast and it needs to be filled or anything like that. You, I assume, looked at casting and went, that's cool, I want to try that.
Yes, correct. So it was very much an interesting thing of like falling into it because I was obsessed with the idea of streaming. Like the reason I did YouTube was because I couldn't stream. I never had a PC. I never had good enough internet. I think I had 0.6 upload until I moved out of home when I was 23. So I just never had this capacity to stream until I first moved out. found a spot on the map with NBN, went there, got all that set up and everything like that, and finally said, awesome, I can stream. So I think I streamed a bit of League and then found my way into a little bit of CS. But yeah, again, wasn't super very good. My friends who I was playing with, they had a CGA team called Fivefold, which I think was Has, Trance, Muffa, Dream, and Scoot, I believe. They're names that don't really sort of hang around anymore. But they ended up qualifying for CGM, and then they went under the name Mavericks. And I still remember the first ever game that I commentated was against like Husky and Burnski, I think it would have been. Can't remember the exact team name, but it was Mavericks versus them. And that was the first game I ever commentated. It was on Cash, CGM game. And it wasn't really commentary. It was kind of just like, I'll stream this game because no one else is broadcasting it. Wanted to share my friends' gameplay. I thought they were really good, very biased. I think I remember calling like Husky a cheater or something like that because it was
very
just
professional.
Crazy. Yeah, exactly. It was garbage, absolute garbage. But there must have been a few moments in there where Muffa, he goes, hey man, look, I could tell that you actually were really excited to watch that game and you were able to share some insight about what they were doing and that kind of stuff. And it was fun to watch. Now, stop being biased, take this a little bit more seriously, and you actually might be able to do something out of this. And I was like, oh, shit, okay. So I then basically just started trying to commentate everything I could because at the time, I think it was actually maybe when you were doing CGP, but there was CGI, CGP were locked, but you could do CGM.
Yeah,
So
I can't remember exactly,
everything.
but I know CG was always a bit like, oh, you can't cast our games without permission and that kind of thing. And okay, fair enough, I suppose, for the top level kind of stuff. I had the exact same issue when I first started casting League, which was my first game. I casted some CG game and they got up at me and were like, you can't do that. And I was like, why not? No one else is doing it. Like, it seems fair enough to me. Anyway, and then you get brought into the fold slowly but surely. And so, I guess at that point, that's where you're like, all right, I want to start trying to take this a little bit more seriously. So let's talk going from CG stuff, which is, I still think, quite base level, quite like noob sort of casting, to MDL, ESEA kind of stuff. I want to go from like 2016 to 2017 very quickly, because I think 2017 is where things really start to kind of kick off for you a little bit. You're kind of getting a little bit more recognized. And most importantly, actually, you get this opportunity to cast a LAN, right, which was WPGI. So first of all, you're doing ESEA stuff, which is quite legitimate, I suppose, at the time, and then you're also doing WPGI, and obviously PGTV was doing some pretty serious business stuff as well. So it sort of felt like everything was going your way in 2017.
Yeah, it all sort of came together. I think two of the guys from the WA community, they had an organization called Riotous, and they kind of brought me into that as a bit of a creator, a bit of a connection point to, help obviously grow the brand. And they ended up picking up a CS team. And one of the guys, KZA, Kieran, he had a contact with HLTV. So I ended up kind of getting quasi approval. I don't really think it was approval in any way, because at the time MDL was 100% open to anyone because it wasn't being professionally broadcasted, and it was always open Go TV, so anyone could kind of pick up. And that was back when like Brainstorm and stuff were doing it as well. So I jumped on one of those games and he put my stream onto HLTV, and immediately you get the gambling viewers. And I was like, oh my God, they've just come out of nowhere. So my channel blew the hell up, and every time I became like obsessed with that number. I was like, I want to grow, I want to keep going. So I think my first stream of that, like early days, I was getting 2, 3, 4, 5,000 viewers on these just oceanic crap games, So it was like Riotous Raccoons, which was like Valiants and those guys back in the day, versus, old Tainted Minds or Chiefs or, those guys. And you would just get so many viewers, and I became obsessed with that. And then I still can't remember the exact turning point, but someone in the chat, that was the big thing. You could interact with the chat. There was no delay. You could just stream live. And since you were doing solo casting, your chat was kind of what spurred you forward. So I remember some guy in the chat who was not someone regular to my understanding. He goes, you should be wearing a suit for this. And I said, okay, that's a bit strange. What do you mean? And he goes, yeah. So he goes, put on a suit, because I had the webcam on, which obviously is not, that was, I guess, adding an extra element of persona when you've only got your solo self.
Oh, I remember this was, okay, so for clarity, this is definitely something that people don't do anymore, but you were casting the game, and everyone at the time started to do this, was that you would have your webcam over, like basically if you were streaming, playing the game with your webcam up, but you were actually casting it, and people would see you casting
kind of like a watch party casting style thing, So I put on the suit, obviously board shorts on, suit jacket on the top with a tie. And I remember just, talking over these games, kind of commentating it. And clearly it stuck, because I became the guy and I had to put on a bloody suit every single time almost, it felt like, otherwise people were let down. So I came up in that wave where Mac and Manic were also doing the exact same thing. And it was a really interesting time because in the end we almost ended up like competing for views, because whoever went live on HLTV first got the majority of the viewers. So it was a very bloodbathy style battle of who would get the commentating stuff.
I do remember that period, because obviously I was not involved in any of that. I was doing I was working for ESL already at that point, and I just remember it seemed really like kind of cutthroat in a way. Like there was a lot of people competing for a lot of the, like there was a lot of casts available. It seemed like there was a lot going on. You could probably, any night you wanted, find something to cast, but there was also a lot of people that were trying to get into it. I remember, you know, like you said, it was yourself, Mac, Manic, plus like AGTV
Komodo,
was there,
Brainstorm, all those guys, like everyone.
I think like even maybe Dweg and Goldie were going around at that time, or they might have been just after, whatever. There was a lot of people, and you know, it's definitely different to now, where I feel like there's not as much happening when it comes to casters in Australia. But it sort of has felt like a bit of an ebb and flow, right? Where when I started, there was just not enough casters, and I got all the jobs because I was kind of one of the only people doing it. And then, you know, when you started, there was a lot of people trying to get through, but you had a lot that you could cast. And now it's kind of like there's not a lot of people doing it, but there's also not a lot of opportunities to cast stuff. If you're not inside of the fold, I guess. But anyway, I mean, that's a bit of an aside. I wanted to sort of also just talk to you quickly about WPGI and stuff, because I wanted to know how you got that job. Why did you get chosen for that? Because I think at the time, right, that could have gone to really anyone. And I understand that event was in Perth, I think. So was that the big reason why you got that, or did you sort of?
I believe so.
Yeah.
So Jim was one of the guys who I built a relationship with very, very early on, and he must have, you know, potentially seen something, or you know, loved my dedication to the job. And I always kind of hung around their stuff. You know, I always watched the Women's League, and always watched everything that they kind of did. I actually met Baal, I think, through Panic back in the day as well. On he was obviously, Baal was from, Sean was from WA, part of WPGI, and then they said, yeah, look, we're doing this LAN event in Perth. We'd love to have you on. And it was kind of like, apparently they used it as an event to grow me effectively. Obviously, you know, the event itself, but Bar was like, I don't even want to cast, bro. Like, I want you to cast. Like, this is for you to get in there and do what you can. So that was the first event that was live with a little tiny crowd, and my parents came and all that kind of stuff. So it was, the first real big thing. And doing it, I was like, oh my God, this is cool. Like having, you know, live production, doing it all for you, and being there whilst Jim was in the server, like spectating manually with his hands whilst casting it alongside. It was really cool. Yeah.
Good times. Yeah, I remember watching that, and I think that was sort of the first time I think that was the first time you were really on my radar, outside of like, oh yeah, I know you exist, but like, oh, you're actually doing something of value apart from like online broadcasts. But we want to skip forward a little bit again to IEM Sydney 2018. So, I mean, we've skipped pretty much 2017 IEM. I guess for you, obviously, that's a pretty big moment where you're like, oh, that's cool, I want to be involved in that. But you didn't really, I don't think, have much to do at IEM 2017.
That one. Yeah, I'm trying to remember back more, like in more detail. I definitely went, and I remember watching the games, but I wasn't really anyone of value, as I sort of said. Like, you know, people recognize me as the MDL commentator, but nothing more. So,
I think that was
very
like
much an attendee.
That was like 1 year too early for a lot of the Aussie involvement. A lot of the Aussie involvement happened at 2018 and 2019. 2017 was very much, it still sort of felt like it was like a global event here, but it didn't feel like so much, at least to me internally, like an Australian owned and run event. But IEM 2018, okay, so this is a big year for a lot of us. Obviously, this for me was the first time I got to cast it. For you, you went as a legacy esports content creator. Now, I don't think this is like a huge note in your career or anything like that, but I did want to bring it up because it, you know, you said you were interviewing the public for content and stuff like that. And I know now, quite deep into your career, and we'll talk about it as we get there into 2022, you started to do a bit of stage hosting and stuff. So I feel like this is like the beginnings of you almost like developing these interview skills, and like maybe some skills that you didn't even think at the time you were going to use. But what was this like for you, going to IEM Sydney and sort of making content there? Was that like, oh, this is sick, you know, I'm kind of in the fold and stuff?
Yeah, for sure. It was my first like paid event that I got to go to. Like, I got paid for WPGI, of course, but it was like the first here's your flights, here's your accommodation. We want you to get over there. We want you to be a part of it. I had a content creator pass, so I could go into the VIP lounge and get beers and all that kind of stuff. And all I really had to do was MJ and Carbon, they put me up for it. Had the jersey, and I was walking around with Wingardian, I believe, who was Winston, who was doing the filming, and we would just have to basically walk up to random people, and it was like roaming Conky style. I think it's roaming Brian from the AFL, where you would go around the venue and interview the attendees and say about how it's going. And that was really, really tough for me for the first time, because I'm a great conversationalist with people I knew, but anything where I have to go up to someone dry and never have spoken to them before was a real big barrier for me. So I think even for the first few, I had to get the people I was with to be like, hey, can you go and see if that person wants to get a question? And then I would interview them accordingly. But we managed to make it work. I got a bit of confidence built off it. And yeah, that was the first sort of real big event for me, where it was people would recognize me around the venue. And I got to go, as I said, like backstage and bump shoulders with a few people. And it was really, really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting topic. And I think that's something that we'll probably talk about quite late in this show or podcast, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Probably in part 2. I know this is going to be released in 2 parts. So I think in part 2, we'll talk about like, anxiety and like talking to people and like that kind of thing and how that affects your role. Because I had similar, not issues per se necessarily with it, but I have similar tendencies almost, where it's like, I don't like going up and talking to people that I don't know. And I had to do a very similar role in 2017. So I think it's an interesting topic. But if you're interested in that, check out part 2. There'll be timestamps for it. It'll be right at the end. But we want to move on to continuing the timeline to Gfinity, right? And this kind of feels like your first big break, I think. So talk to me about Gift of the Gab, because this was something that you mentioned to me, but I had actually already found before I messaged you, about all of this stuff. And I was looking at it, I was like, what the fuck is Gift of the Gab or some shit like that? I can remember from back then, and because again, I didn't have really any involvement with Gfinity, I was an outside viewer. All I really remember was like you being on the broadcast in some capacity, but I didn't really realize it was like some kind of competition or something like that. Was it a competition of some sort?
Yeah, it was. So there was the 3 titles that obviously Gfinity entered into, which was Fighting Game, Rocket League, and CS. It was done obviously at the something park in Sydney,
Moore Park. That's
it. Yeah, where the theatre was. And that was my first professional thing. But to get there, I obviously reached out. I tried to connect with everyone that I knew, because it was a few industry members that got picked up by Gfinity to work there full time. But the Gift of the Gab competition was the first, because I think Mac and some others were the ones. Jim,
Kev, Carl, and Karath. Yeah,
Kev? That's right. Yeah, they were the actual official ones. They were in Sydney, of course. So they were the ones that got the gig. So I was like, okay, again, working through my brain, how the hell am I going to get to this event for the first time? I want to do this. And then someone linked me, Gift of the Gab competition. The winner of each, there was one from each of the 3 titles. I can't remember who got it for the FGC. But it was Bizer who did the Rocket League, if you remember him. He was another Perth commentator. So he won the Rocket League one, and I ultimately won the CSGO one. But it didn't come easily, I tell you that much. There was speculations that there was some foul play, because effectively all it was you had to upload a VOD of you commentating to YouTube. And the amount of votes you got by likes, I think it was, on the video, was how your vote got scaled. Then there was ultimately a panel that reviewed it. Very legit, right? So what ended up happening is a relatively unknown commentator just rocketed up, and I think it was likes and comments on the video, and all the comments were user 127, wow, nice vid, etc. I had to call that. That's purely speculation. It never got called upon or anything like that, but I had to fight for this bugger. Like, I had to go hard. So my previous Call of Duty connections came into play, and I still had members from FaZe and Optic and all that kind of stuff that still followed my Twitter.
Right.
So I went far and wide. I said, boys, if I get this thing, not only do I win a $3,500 Alienware laptop, I also get to go flights and accommodation to Sydney to commentate in a studio. I've never done that in this sense before, because obviously WPGI was great, but it wasn't as official and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I worked hard. I had like FaZe Pomage and Sprat and all these guys that were massive share my video and basically said, I'll follow if you end up watching or commenting on this video. So I managed to, it was tight. I think we were close, but I managed to get just across the line, and then the panel ultimately picked mine. And I remember just waiting there, refresh to see what happened. I got the call up, and I remember just running out of my office in my house to my housemate, just screaming, I got it, oh my God.
All right. And that's actually a great reaction, because I wanted to ask you, was this kind of the moment that it really felt like maybe the gates had opened on this career? Because, you've been doing some good stuff here and there, and like, you're in and amongst it, but I think this was kind of the first like really pro studio job that you had been able to get, because actually by rights it kind of looks like Gfinity was like almost, and I would say probably it was more professionalized as a broadcast than even the stuff that like ESL was doing at the time, because ESL was doing stuff in studio and stuff like that, but this was on TV as well, I think.
Yeah, it was on TV. It was live broadcast, obviously, from the studio with a crowd, all players on LAN, every single game. It was the one where obviously they had some professional players, because remember on that competition, like Order, who was the only pro team as
it was
a five,
a bit of a
actually
weird format.
Farmed it. Yeah. I think Chiefs had a decent run, but you bought in as an org, and then you had to, I think, put in some
draft some
academy
players or
style
something
players.
like that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but yeah, it was all super professional. It was the first time I ever had my makeup done. Live broadcast. I was on this desk with Jim, and I remember it vividly because it was the first broadcast where, when you fill, and nowadays you can just talk about garbage. That Gfinity, no one was allowed to kind of stray the path.
Yeah.
We had I think it was like a 25-minute technical pause, and only the pistol round on Inferno had been played. So we're analyzing every single nook and cranny of Inferno, me and Jim. Jim's pulling out the puns to keep us going. And it was, I remember it being a real strain, but it was a good mental test, how in the boiling pot can you handle? And I think I handled it relatively well. But yeah, I was crap. I was just learning, and but it was the first like real Rigi-Dig. Because I'd obviously flown myself to IEM, flown myself to PAX, been at events, but never ever been like sent over to do that kind of.
Did you get paid for it? Was it like the reward was doing it?
The reward was doing it, yeah. So the prize was the flights and accommodation to go there and get. I think it was 1 best of 3 we got. So yeah.
Okay, so that was the next question I had actually, was how much casting did you actually do for Gfinity? Because I couldn't really find too many VODs of it. Any VOD that I found was like Jim and Mac casting probably.
So you didn't get. I can't remember the exact game, but it was Connie's team, which was like one of the Sydney or Melbourne.
I think she was Brisbane, was she?
Must have been Brisbane, but it was definitely Connie's team that we casted. It was a pretty one-sided affair, but like it was still fun. It was a really cool experience to get in there, because you're casting some big names that I've been watching for years at tier 1, but never really casting. So
yeah, right. I mean, it must have been a pretty big experience anyway, because obviously being in the studio, doing all that. I remember my first time doing studio shows, and it was like quite a big deal for me. So anyway, door opens there. Now we jump forward to 2019 in April, and the door kind of opens in another capacity, in that this was your first job with ESL. You did the IEM Sydney Oceania qualifier. So yeah, like you said, you were pretty crap at Gfinity maybe, but you must have impressed someone or done something, and you found your first work at ESL Australia, which now obviously is a relationship that you have continued to maintain even to this day. But there's a lot of steps through to this that we probably need to break down, because
I look forward to this, because this is a very defining moment for both you and me, I think.
You were one of the guys, and to be fair, everyone at the time was just like really hammering on the door, like, I want to get into the Ivory Tower. It wasn't the Ivory Tower back then, but it was the same thing. It was like, I want to do this. How do I get to do it? What can I, use me. I want to cast. So what was that experience like? How long were you trying to break down the door at ESL Australia before, you eventually got in?
Yeah. So I think for me in the insurance world, in my full-time gig, it's very much about building those relationships and finding those key people to then get into their network, and then ultimately they'll refer. In Australia, one of the unfortunate realities is it's not always what you know, it's who you know. That runs in every single industry, whether people like it or not. So my thing was, okay, the key players and what do I need to do to get there? So obviously at the time you were the talent manager for ESL Australia. So I was like, Elfish Guy's the guy. And Kameen, I think was
Kameen. I remember it being Kameen that like ultimately was the one to, I think, do most of the emailing back and forth with you. I remember being on CC with a lot of those emails, but I think it was Kameen at that point still before he went overseas that kind of got this done.
Yeah, exactly right. So I identified like you guys, okay, I need to, impress them or get in the door and get my face to the name. So I think it started off then I'd been kind of trying for a while, but this is my weird kind of ego phase. So I just got off the high from Gfinity. I was like, I've done it now. I'm getting there. I can keep on going and see this progression. But I think I had a bit of a falter in a point where I was like, I'm better than these guys who are doing ESL. And I can do this. And I want to get on IEM. I want to get on, all these big events that are coming up. So I remember sending yourself and Kameen this big email saying, I want to do IEM Sydney 2019 groups. And Kameen said, no, but let's have a phone call. Right. And you were on that phone call as well. And it was basically just a big rundown of like, we know who you are. We've got some reservations because I was very outspoken on my Twitter, I think, at the time, I think as well.
Well, I mean, you still fucking tweet a lot, let's be real. But I think, no, I don't know what it was necessarily. I think, I can probably say, one, you're in Perth. So that's the biggest detractor. Two, obviously, you were quite fresh still. You hadn't had a lot of experience. Like, you'd done 1 or 2 studio shows. And it's like, how do you, as someone who's making that hiring decision, which, by the way, at the time, I can guarantee you there was no way I had any say in who was working on IEM. So RCB, who's working IEM, not going to make a difference.
Well, you were trying to get the gig as well.
I wanted that
Global,
gig too,
right? Yeah, and correct.
I don't even think Kameen really would have had much sway when it came to who was casting IEM. I think that was like a global decision and maybe the top of AU decision. Anyway, I might be getting things wrong, but I think like the irony of it was like you were talking to us, asking to get onto IEM. And there was just no chance either of us could have even made a difference in getting you on IEM. Not to mention the fact that you were wholly inexperienced. I think that's the big thing for me is like, I just love this mentality of like, oh, I've done 1 studio cast. I could do an IEM. That'll be fine.
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because I look at it now. I look at people who are in that similar boat to what I was, and people go, I'm better than that person who is on the job. Why aren't I getting that gig? So that's what I did. I found out. I said, I think I'm better than these people who are casting ESL. I want to get on that show. And then it was a very like big reality check in the sense of like, this is why, like, you can't just go to here on IEM. Like, you need to do here first. So it was kind of like, I think you actually gave me, or Kameen actually gave me like an in-depth physical kind of like a checklist.
I remember a big email.
That's right. It was like, you got to do champs, then you got to do a qualifier, then you got to do this, then you got to do that. And then eventually you might get to IEM Sydney. And it was like, okay, so the opportunity came up only a few weeks later, I think it was, to do an ANZ Champs with Brainstorm. And I ended up flying over and stayed, I think it was Chi at the time I stayed with. And then, did the show and then got the call back up a little bit later for someone who was missing for the IEM Sydney quals.
I think what happened was like, there was like multiple quals happening at the same time. And at this time, this was like the golden era as far as I'm concerned. Because there was like every qualifier that happened, there would be a studio broadcast for it. And like there was an OCE qualifier, and I looked at this actually on Wikipedia for this particular qualifier. There was an OCE qualifier, SCA qualifier, and an East Asia qualifier that were all going on at the same time. And I think Pilly and I were doing the SCA qualifier. And then,
that's right.
I don't know what the deal was with like Karath or Mac or Brainstorm or any of those guys at the time, but for some reason you and Manic ended up doing the OCE qualifier. I don't know what the other guys were doing. They might have been doing East Asia or something like that. So basically it was just like there was just so much on that I guess we needed extra hands, and so you got brought in. I think, to be honest, looking back at that, it's like I'm surprised, right? Because you're from Perth, like, and that is a big problem, especially nowadays, because of how you would know how expensive the flights are. But I think maybe back then the flight costs weren't quite so bad, so it was kind of just like, we'll just do it.
It was interesting. This is something I can actually go on to, I guess, if anyone's watching this who is aspiring to be a professional caster, and what I had to do. So obviously I've worked full time during this entire time. That's not stopped. So when I got the opportunity to do ANZ Champs, now obviously I got paid by ESL 100%, but at the time it was kind of like, can you get yourself here? And I was like, absolutely. Like, I'll be there in a heartbeat. Let me know when the opportunity is available. I fly myself there. So the first time I had some reasonable lead time. So I think my flights cost about 600 return. Stayed with a friend, managed to get there, and obviously got paid for my work, which balanced out the cost a little bit. And then the next time round, it was 2 days out. I remember getting the call up. And by this time, Mac had already moved up from his place. And then Manic moved up from Melbourne. So they were already in Sydney. So it was a big reach. And I think whoever reached out to me at the time might have been Kameen, was, hey, can you do this thing? We obviously want to pay you, but we, can't, like, are you able to get yourself there? And I said, like, no questions. I said, yep, $1,000 for flights, 2 days notice. I did it. Stayed with Jim and Sniper and that. And just made it work, right? Like I was lucky enough that obviously from my full-time job, I had a little bit of extra money. And now I don't encourage that at all. Like everyone deserves to be paid for that work in a sense, but it's like you got to pay a little bit. Like I saw that money that I spent on the flights as investment to myself.
I think that was also investment. A little bit of a different time then as well, right?
God,
it wasn't as much money in esports, and it wasn't as legitimized, and it was kind of like, I feel like you can kind of get away with it back then. I know in recent times I've been a little bit more outspoken about not paying your own way to go to esports events anymore, but I think it is context dependent. So in that context, I mean, it kind of makes sense.
It was all it was. It was like, otherwise, obviously the guys who were over there, it would have been a thing of, I would have had to move over to Sydney. Like I totally understand and appreciate the situation, and I hold no, like, because I do not regret that at all. But if I had have continued that, obviously it would have been a massive detriment to my career, and I never would have continued.
You would have been taken advantage of if it was more
100%.
Than 1 or 2 times sort of thing.
It was literally those 2 times, and then from there I was paid for from there.
Yeah, which is good. So look, okay, so you've started working with ESL. You've done a bit of Gfinity stuff. You've done some studio work now, and I think another big thing that happens to you in 2019 is you work with Komodo for the first time, because obviously you two have sort of forged this partnership, this Conkmodo partnership that we never stop hearing about on Twitter. Anyone that doesn't know what it is, I don't know, you maybe have been living under a rock, but either way, you meet or you cast with Komodo for the first time. And I think this was on like some kind of LPL show, August 2019. So I want to know, how did that sort of come about, and how did you guys meet?
So we used to watch each other because we did like MDL. I think Dion was in a very similar boat where he would do similar things to me. He was growing. He was just very keen. Like I think the thing about Komodo is he's always, I say looked up to me in a way, not a way of wanting to be like me, but I think he's seen my trajectory and he's like really been attracted kind of to that. So when he first invited me onto one of his broadcasts, I think I came on to the tail end of an MDL game for maybe like 10 rounds, and then we got an opportunity to do the FYIs, whether that was engaged directly by CG or if we just did it because we wanted to or whatever, because those games were always really fun. You're getting to see who was going to qualify for CGP. So we did that, and then ultimately we actually ended up getting to do the CGP event in full, I think it was. So that was really fun, being a part of all that for the season. And I don't know, we had a reasonably good dynamic. Like I always feel like whenever Komodo commentated with me, he worked really hard. So in any time where I was potentially getting a little bit complacent, he kind of almost like whipped me into shape without telling me that I was falling behind. He would just put up this really high standard every single time. Like he was trying so hard. And it made me kind of go, shit, I gotta pick up here. I gotta keep up with him. So he's always driven me forward, and he's always been like a massive supporter of me personally. And he's just a good dude, man. Like honestly, he's a really, really kind soul, and love him dearly. So me and him just always had that thing of, Mac and Manic were a duo quite regularly for a little bit, and then obviously yourself and Pilly. So it was hard to find a regular duo, and Komodo just ultimately was there and became that guy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that I've noticed about when I've worked with Komodo as well, which has been quite rarely. I think I've only actually directly worked on a broadcast with him 2 or 3 times, but
one of which was the minor, right? That just went.
Yeah, the minor, and then there was an ESEA finals broadcast that he came for, and then there was like the ANZ Champs broadcast where he won that fucking mic check, the casting thing for ESL. But every time he's kind of come quite well prepared is something I felt like, especially on that ESEA broadcast, I sort of noticed that he seemed to be very well prepared. So that's something, I guess, credit to Komodo. But on the topic as well, was it at the time something that you thought was going to be long term, or were you looking for it to be something long term? Like, would you say there was like a spark initially, or was it something that sort of took time to kind of like build this relationship, this rapport together?
Yeah, I think it was just like, again, a similar thing of he was just so keen. Like he
Mm.
loved it. Like he was happy to jump onto MDL broadcasts. Like obviously for those we weren't getting paid. We were just doing it
Yeah.
for, to build our own Twitch channels and stuff to get that exposure. So in the early days, he was just keen to do anything. And I think that's ultimately kind of why it continued on so regularly, because I was in the exact same boat. I felt like the best way to kind of grow my brand was just cast everything whenever I got the opportunity. So any of those online qualifiers that obviously didn't have a studio broadcast, we would be on to them straight away. Anything open Go TV that we could do for international events, we'd be on them straight away. I think we did like a Galleria Game Master together or something, which was really fun. And we just did basically, as I said, just whatever was available to us at the time. And that just kind of meant that we were kept together. And as I said before, like he was always really, as you mentioned, really well prepared. He always had good info, and he is very technically sound when it comes to like a production standpoint. Like he can run the technical side himself. So he was quite often the guy behind the sticks, I guess you could say, and then I would be the host. And it just worked out very well.
Yeah. That is actually another big bonus. But either way, we'll move it away from Komodo and move it towards your playing career. I say that with the the quotation marks, because August 2019, you actually played a game of ANZ Champs, and this was with a team called Justice, which at the time actually featured some pretty good names. Brace, Roffelko, Rasos, Tham, and Sigma were on that team. Now, I want to know the circumstances of why were you playing this game? How did it feel? What was it like being in an ANZ Champs game? And how you felt about going 15-40 in your first game on HLTV.
Man, all right. So to defend myself, first of all, it's against the current Encore. It was like Sterling, Hazard, APOC, those guys. So first game I queue into, basically I think because I had played with Roffelko and Tham on and off for a while. They always, the Mark and Larry, that kind of era, they would always kind of have that spot. And they, I guess, liked playing with me. I was fun, so we pugged together a lot. We actually played a season of CGP as well, which is really, really funny. So I managed to get sort of my foot in the door with those guys just because they didn't care how they performed. They just wanted to have fun. And they said, Conky, we need you to sub in for this game. Like, can you just slot in and be entry? I was like, hell yes. I just threw myself. It was Nuke we played in our first map, I remember. And oh my God, like Hazard, if he would just dance on you. Like the guy is so good. But yeah, we just had a blast. Like I think we managed in the first game like 16-9 or something like that. But the best part was going back and watching the broadcast, because Manic and Brainstorm were casting it and MC was observing, and they were just memeing on me the entire time. It was so, so funny. So really, really good experience. Like Roffelko and Tham are some of the best blokes out there. They're so nice and kind to play along with, and they would just gas each other up. So I was never that great, but I think the energy I brought to the game, I was able to have a lot of fun with it. I actually did win a LAN 2018 or something, some WA LAN with a bit of a motley crew of boys against. We beat the best claim to fame was beating Twinkie Ferg and Misfit to qualify for the grand finals, and then we won. So I have very much intermittently had that history, but working full time, trying to get scrim hours in, especially being 3 hours behind in Perth, is just impossible. So I could never commit to a team, and I always saw a bit more value in casting. So in the quiet times where there wasn't anything to cast, you better believe I was playing.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's like a little interesting tidbit, I thought. But not a huge big deal as far as your career is concerned. But what I think is actually quite a big deal for your career was EXTREMESLAND at the end of 2019. So there's again quite a few layers to this one. I think I want to start things off with Conky as a tournament organizer, because this is, it's like a little tidbit maybe at the start of the show that if people knew what we were talking about, they knew. And if you know, you know. But if you don't know, you don't know. And maybe now you do, because I don't think people look at you and say, oh, tournament organizer. But you had a big hand in running the Oceania event, which I think was in Sydney, to qualify teams through to EXTREMESLAND 2019 finals.
Yeah, I'll summarize it as quickly as possible because it is super interesting the way it all panned out, right? So this was very much on that point of me talking about identifying a key player and contacting them. So I originally reached out to, I think it was Kang, the guy at the time from Benku Zowie, and he was running the tournaments for EXTREMESLAND. I found him and I said, Kang, I want to cast your event. Like, hit me up. I'm ready to go. And he goes, well, actually, we need someone to run it. I was like, oh, okay. And I kind of had an involvement with Instafrag at the time with Ian, with Sniper. And I was like, yeah, okay, we can do that. I'll absolutely do that. So I put that all together. I ended up using the Instafrag platform to run the online qualifier. We got it all sort of moving. I think we had pretty sure we had Wanda supporting us from a like admin point of view, and we had a few members that we paid for. Obviously, Jim helped us out a little bit, so it was a bit of a community effort. But ultimately, I was the one that was in the connection realm with Kang, getting it all going. I think we ended up having about 50 teams compete, and then that ended up being into a hand where we reconvened with Karath, who had the relationship with FBI in Sydney, the LAN cafe there, had the top 4 finals in that event over in Sydney, which was also sort of very much run with myself. Kang actually came over from Taipei, introduction, we all met, we all mingled, and then ultimately that ended up being the 2 teams qualifying for China, which we all ended up going to, Jordan. But the lead up to that with the teams was a little awkward because there was a direct clash with a major qualifying event, I believe, or an IEM or something.
It was the ESL Pro League stayed. Like, I think back then it was like ESL Pro League was still a thing in Oceania. Like, it was ESL Pro League Oceania, which was like obviously a qualifier for ESL Pro League itself. And so the top 4 teams were all like, well, we have to play Pro League. But like, I think it was what, Greyhound and Order might have qualified.
And Order, I think. Yeah.
And then Greyhound and Order were like, well, there was something like changing dates or something like that. And then one of the teams was like, we're not going to do that. And basically tried to fuck 2 of the teams. And inevitably what ended up happening was like Order and Greyhound were like, well, fuck, we just can't go to EXTREMESLAND, more or less, was the TLDR.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So I think in the end, the top 4 teams, which was, Order, Avant, Chiefs, and Greyhound, ended up doing it. And that was the famous event where White Girl Wasted beat Order on LAN. Crazy. Yeah, that was nuts. So, it was very, very weird because I think what was happening is the teams were trying to make a bit of a pact to say, look, we won't mess each other over if we go to EXTREMESLAND. And then the other team was like, well, we're still going to play in it, which meant that the teams who went to EXTREMESLAND would have missed out. So, it was very, very scrappy, which in the end gave a completely different opportunity to Ground Zero and Genuine, who went over. But that was so cooked. Trying to get 10 players Chinese visas within 2 weeks was just nightmare fuel.
Getting a Chinese visa to begin with is hard, let alone on 2 weeks' notice.
Well, getting ours was hard enough, and then doing that. So, and then like Noobster slept through his alarm and had to get like an urgent visa or all this. Anyway, it was just
that's a classic Noobster moment. Actually, I feel like that's a recurring problem.
So they all flew over to like Melbourne to get it, and he didn't get it, and it was just wild. But we got there. I think that was the key factor. All of us ended up getting there, but my involvement in running the tournament, because I was kind of an outlier prior to getting the casting gig in China with you guys, like I was still below the scope of who we went over in you, Jim, Pilly, Blair, I think it was.
Blair was and then so it was me, Jim, Pilly, yourself, and Blair as the casters, and Karath went, or Jim was the host, which he got fucked over for. But anyway, Karath went over because he had some kind of involvement with the event as well, but ended up not casting, and like he just ended up being our translator / helper / general everyman at the EXTREMESLAND event. So that was weird. Did he help you with? He must have helped you with the OSLAN, I think.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, so he was a big involvement in the OSLAN. So very much donning the old Karathland days. We ran that event together where he was kind of the direct organizer with FBI, managing all the logistics and stuff, and I was more so the face, I guess. And then I ended up casting the final with Pilly.
Yep. All right. So obviously, that gets all sorted. Then you help all these teams to get over to EXTREMESLAND. But talk to me a little bit about actually being in China. And like for you, I think this was the first international event that you had ever done for esports. So obviously quite a big deal. I remember that. I remember that event quite fondly. Like I know we got hard fucked at that event. We were like in a hallway casting to like the production team for the English broadcast didn't speak English. So it was just like a whole scuffed setup. Long ass hours because it was four times best of threes every day, with only 2 pairings, and obviously for Jim he didn't have anyone to replace him as host.
No break.
He did the whole thing every day, getting at like 8 a.m. and not finish until 2 a.m. and whatever. So that was all fucked. But I still look at the event and go, God, I wish we could do that event again.
Oh man, it was, and for me, even like working those long hours, I just didn't care because it was such a big step up for me, like it felt like just the works of 6 months leading to this big holy grail in eXTREMESLAND. So basically, like, you know, after doing all that and being able to get over there, it was not only super exciting because it was my first ever outside of, you know, New Zealand doesn't count, that's part of Australia really, but first big international event with international teams and you know, getting to see like you know, like Tai Lu walk around the halls and stuff. I was like, oh my god, this is it. And that was my first real kind of connection with yourself in a casting sort of capacity, because what I noticed there was it was still that one moment about a year span where I thought I was really good and that I was on your level. And then I worked with you and realized how fucking good you actually were and how far I had to come. Because, you know, as a caster, you can think you're really good, but it's more about being involved in a studio, how to host, how to flow, how to do all that kind of extra stuff that you never experience in an online broadcast. So it was like a whole nother world. So that first day, I think it was, really humbled me. And then I engaged in the event. I learned, I listened, I had some awesome games with Pilly, got to do some little sightseeing with Jim. And then it all kind of ended up at the crux of the event where we're at the after party and we're sitting there in this club in China where no one around you speaks English. The dance floor is a metal pad that bounces.
It was on springs,
It was on springs, and I'm sitting there in that room. Remember, Neo rocked up because it was like IEM
randomly
Beijing.
There.
Yeah, he just rocks up, and I was like, called him over, and he sat down with us, had a chat. So it was like the most surreal event. It was like I felt like Hollywood. You know, I'd made it.
Yeah, that after party was very surreal. Like that, I can 100% get those vibes from you, because I was sitting there, I was like, what the fuck is going on? There was like girls like dancing behind us because we were like in booths and they were like standing up.
We had the velvet rope VIP area.
Yeah. So there was like girls dancing on the fucking, I don't know what you'd call that. Like it wasn't a stage really. It was just like they were on this bench type thing, just a row of them. And then there was this stage that was literally like going like this. People were like in a mosh pit almost, basically underneath the DJ
playing hard style, smoking in the club. Like it was surreal.
Yeah, people smoking in the club. Some fucking pimp was trying to not pimp the guy. There was a literal pimp trying to sell a prostitute to Billy next to us. I've never experienced anything like this. I mean, look, what happens at the fucking after party stays at the after party. Look, nothing really happened there, to be honest.
No, we're all pretty good. We just
but it was like a whole like, what the hell is my life kind of moment. Like this is amazing.
And even remember like getting to the club, like the whole bus taking us there, then we walk through these like dark alleys to the main room. Like it was an actual like VIP moment. That's what it felt like.
Yeah. So look, that was a great event. Shout out to eXTREMESLAND and everyone that put that one on. But obviously it feels like in 2018 to 2019, things have been on the upright for Conky. Everything's been going great. Okay. You've done your work, you've done your studio work, you've gone to some big events, you've gone overseas and casted, and then COVID happens. So, boom.
Mark McGowan locks the borders.
2019, December, we're in China. Little do we know there is COVID in China at that time. We come back, you know, whatever, live your life for a little bit, early 2020, but by sort of mid 2020 is when things are like, oh shit, this is real. Everything's fucking locked down. CSGO's dead. Valorant starting to come out, so we'll talk about that a little bit. But from going from 2018 and 2019, where it sort of feels like your career really started to sort of skyrocket, I looked at what you did in 2020 and I was like, there really wasn't like all that much as far as CS was concerned. Like you did some, you know, some LPL, I guess. LPL sort of started to kick off again and doing some online stuff. But then, you know, there was really only a couple of like minor ESL things that I guess were like online broadcast, remote broadcast sort of stuff, but nothing really major. So you've gone from like basically being at the peak of your career as far as casting is concerned to right back to square one. So what is that like? What is it like resetting, going from, you know, running and being at an event overseas in China to back to bedroom casts all of a sudden?
Yeah, it was gutting, hey, like, because we had, I think it was the West G event that was meant to occur in January, and then that got delayed for a non-COVID reason, and then it was meant to be on February 14th, I think it was, in Macau, which would have been sick, like the Las Vegas of Hong Kong. That would have been incredible. And that was the first event that got cancelled straight up due to COVID, and it was kind of like, oh, okay, that's a bit weird. It was before the lockdowns in Australia really started to commence. But yeah, like I ended up just before then, I moved into a 1x1 apartment. So I'd only just started, I moved out solo effectively from my previous house where I had a housemate. He built a house, so needed to go to live there. So I said to myself, I'll do solo for a year. And I was solo. Oh my God, 2 months of working from home directly, like when the actual pandemic, I suppose, hit Australia. Everyone went into lockdown, everyone went into chaos. You're scared, like feels like a zombie apocalypse going to the shop and all that kind of stuff. But I was alone. It was crazy. Like I was sitting basically at this desk equivalent at my old house, 16 hours a day because there was nothing else to do. So from a commentating perspective, I did manage to get a couple of little things that I wouldn't have got historically, because obviously when, your sponges and machines and that aren't doing studio events, it kind of trickles out to the masses. So I reached out and found again a contact at ESL that kind of gave me a little bit here and there. And I ultimately got to do a few qualifier style events with ESL, which went on the main channel. And the biggest one being I got a couple of games with Brainstorm doing ESL Pro League when it was online fully. So that was sick because I got to, I think I got to interview Dupree, I got to interview Blade, got to cast a Na'Vi game, obviously. So that was like really cool, but it obviously A, didn't feel the same, B, the hours were weird, and I missed out on other stuff because WA was really unique in the sense that we were hard locked basically to the rest of mainly Melbourne and Sydney 2 years flat, like straight up 2 years. But the trade-off was that we weren't locked down in WA. We could go out and do stuff. So we were in and out of lockdown, but when it came to like being able to go out and get lunch and coffees and no masks and no nothing, like we didn't have any vaccine requirements. We didn't have anything. We could just literally go and do entirely within WA with no restriction. But as a trade-off for me, a guy that's desperately wanting to get out and cast again, I missed out on some big stuff, which you guys obviously ended up getting by purely just because you were able to get to the Sydney studio.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we got a lot of... 2020 was actually quite a good year for me as a caster. Obviously, a lot of things happened in 2020 that were not ideal, but like for me as a caster and for the other Sydney casters, we got a lot of like B-stream broadcasts because worldwide, all the studios were not able to operate. And it was like, well, the only studio that can really do these shows outside of like the ones that are doing the mainstream is Sydney. So we did a lot of like overnight shows. That ESL Pro League that you're talking about, that was we were doing like 3 weeks of ESL Pro League B streams.
Yeah,
and that
and was that the nocturnal stage as well, where you were doing it like fully nocturnal?
Yeah. And that was like a day where there was like 3 or 4 games on at once. It might have been like the final day, because normally they have all those games at the same time so that no one can like, fuck around with the round robin. If we lose this, someone else goes through, something like that. Anyway, so it was a good year for us as far as casting was concerned. But like when you say you missed out on a lot, I guess that is true. But I don't think there was really that much to miss out on. Unfortunately, like, all the big events like IEM Sydney got cancelled, everything, all these MEOs got cancelled, everything like that didn't exist, in the bin. And we were basically just doing all these online broadcasts. And so, yeah, very, very disappointing. And I think the other big disappointing thing for me, which I don't know that anyone has even recovered from, like I feel like we've started to recover from the lack of big shows in Australia because DreamHack is back and stuff like that. But I don't feel like I've ever been able to regain the international opportunities that I had prior to COVID. And I think maybe the same thing can be said for a lot of people because, I was getting 4 or 5 international gigs a year, and I had a couple that were already sort of locked in, but then cancelled due to COVID, just like you said. And it's just like, where have all of those gone? Like they've all just disappeared. My biggest one was like a PUBG one, an Ace of Predator PUBG that was supposed to happen in Manila, and it would have been sick, and it just got cut, and then never came back, obviously. So, bit of a disappointing year, and I think for a lot of casters in our region, it's a year that kind of hit us hard. But one good thing that did happen for you, and for maybe a lot of people actually, was Valorant being released. So I want to sort of get this from your perspective, right? Because I think a lot of people, a lot of casters looked at Valorant, were like, this is going to be my game. I'm going to transition straight away into Valorant. I know it's a Riot product, so it's going to have a lot of support and whatever. And that was part of the allure for a lot of casters because they saw it as a good career opportunity, I suppose. But what was it like from your perspective? Was it always a game that you wanted to cast when you saw the clips coming out and things like that, when Project A was being talked about? I'm talking even before Valorant was released. Or was it something that you felt like you kind of had to play and enjoy before you sort of transferred over?
Yeah, I was super stubborn, like really, really stubborn with this whole thing because, like, the way League obviously operates, as you know, is they heavily kind of balance the game towards the masses, which is absolutely understandable. They want to sell skins, they want to market it, they want to get the casual player in as much as possible. So I thought a game where you could, basically play Counter Strike, but have a ultimate rocket launcher ability that could kill 3 people in one go was just ridiculous. And I'm like, look, this game isn't going to beat Counter Strike. It's not going to knock it out the park. And then I saw people investing, like when the game was in beta, T1 was paying Brax like a $20,000 a month salary before the game was even released. And I was just like, man, like people are investing. They're moving away from an established title that is good and putting all this money into a space that may not even work out. So I was really, really nervous and apprehensive about it. I didn't play the beta. Obviously saw heaps of people getting into it. Komodo was like the big one. He was like casting all these, beta tournaments that were going on and all this kind of stuff. He just got straight in there. And then Mac and Pilly started to show a little bit of interest, and I was like, bugger it, like there's nothing else to do. There's not much CS going on. I may as well give it a go. So I started playing it. The game is still to this day incredibly frustrating just to play. I feel like because you've got, especially at the start, it was like you've got people that have come from Fortnite, PUBG, League, Overwatch, CS, every single game, and so many communities kind of getting mashed together early means that it was a very weird kind of dynamic. So the CS players obviously launched to the top at the very beginning because they had the fundamentals, but as the new school players started to learn the game and come up, it became a very weird dynamic. So you'd have back to the days, of touching, I guess, back on like COD days, you'd all of a sudden be playing this game Valorant at the age of 27 for me and having a 15-year-old telling me he wants to sleep with my mother. So it's like you move away from that on CS and then you get in Valorant.
Don't think you're old enough for that, mate.
Oh, no, exactly. So it's just like, it wasn't a community that I really got around, and I was very apprehensive about it. But then when, obviously, long-term relationship with LPL winning the contract, moving into it, and everyone wanting to run Valorant competitions, I said, yeah, bugger it. It is fun to cast. I'll get into it. And it does play very well into my hand as a play-by-play commentator because it's kind of, you've got to know the ability names. You've got to speak it quick and all that kind of stuff. So it worked out in the end and was a very good fit for my casting style, even though CS was more my interest still and still remains to that be this day.
All right. So, I guess it's interesting for me because like talking about these early Valorant opportunities, maybe you didn't get on the first couple of beta tournaments and that kind of thing, but you did do the Order and the Chiefs event, I think, to my knowledge, both of the events. So I remember that period quite, not negatively per se, but I think part of the way this all went down was part of the reason I didn't ever really get into Valorant, because I was like, there's just so many people here that it's a race to the bottom, and everyone was like, I'm just going to do it for whatever. I'm going to do it for fucking a pair of shoes. That's fine.
Yep.
And for some people, that's okay. And I don't begrudge people for doing that. But I looked at that from my perspective, and I thought, me as a caster, the position I'm in, the amount that I'm charging to do some broadcasts, I can't in my right mind go on one of these broadcasts and say, I'll do it for free or I'll do it for a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
Because that's like hypocritical almost, like I can't justify charging X amount of dollars to someone and then doing another broadcast for free. So I didn't really feel like that. So what did you feel like about these sort of early Valorant gigs? Because I remember they were just like a clusterfuck of casters. Like every man and their dog wanted to cast Valorant within the Oceanic scene. I remember these, 4 or 5 streams with different casters on it. So how did that sort of all play for you? Because I felt like very early kind of solidified yourself as one of the top casters. How did that transition? Like how did you manage to lock that in so early?
It came very, very quickly about because still during the Fortress event that went on, which was, I guess, one of the first ones, that Rise of Valor, I think it was, they tried to do some studio work, but COVID obviously made that really, really hard. And I think they only based Melbourne casters and paid them, like a pittance. It was rough. They could have probably done it online. There was a bit of, some issue with that. But in the end, they went ahead with it. It didn't go the way they wanted it to. But that was kind of like left a sour taste in my mouth. So I actually competed in that. Avril was kind of like watch partying our game. And then there was an issue with an admin that didn't like almost didn't turn over a ruling and all that kind of stuff. So it was just scrappy, like getting my way in. We almost made the playoffs. Like that was the really funny thing, a motley crew with like me and Panic and stuff. So just trying to feel into the game and that kind of thing. And then some of the other tournament organizers got involved, like obviously Order, especially, you know, Swifty when he was running these events at the time. Good friend of mine. He has a passion for that kind of stuff. So I knew he was always going to try put on a good show. He was one of the ones that actually wanted to pay people a normal wage. So we were getting similar to what we're kind of getting for an ESL broadcast or that kind of thing with these independent organizers. But I guess I can kind of go into a bit of detail early on with LPL and stuff. I think because the way of the arrangement was, right, put it out to bidding and organizers could bid for the job, and I think they could charge for it or not. In the end, they got it under like a free agreement, I think it was. And then ultimately they had to get sponsors in to make up the rest of that revenue. So they had nothing really to pay their talent. So when myself and Komodo started working it, we built an agreement with LPL to basically say, we're happy to do the very, very start to build your guys' product at a low cost, but it has to have an agreement that it's going to grow. So from between now and then in the starts, it's been roughly 2 years, I guess. We've tripled the hourly rate. So it was disgustingly low at the start, upset a lot of people, especially like I know in the R6 community, like some of the CS casters, you know, didn't want to take it on, obviously, on the early days. I still considered myself tier 2 caster wise instead of being tier 1. So I didn't value myself as highly. So I was happy to kind of accept it and do it. But on that premise that we needed to build that as the event was more successful. So I'm proud that we managed to do that, but yeah, it was definitely an interesting time at the start. Like, you know, as I said, getting paid that much is just unacceptable, really.
I mean, and let's talk about missing some of those Fortress events, because I know, like, you know, I think you had a bit of a back and forth with Fortress, if I remember correctly. I don't really think we need to get into that. That's not what I'm here to talk about. What I want to talk about, though, more so is when you missed those opportunities at the time, from the outside looking in, those seemed like the biggest Valorant opportunities in Oceania. So what was it like missing that? Did you sort of feel like you were kind of missing out on the boat a little bit? You thought, if I don't get these, and obviously you didn't, and what sort of then transcribed, but if I don't get these, what is that going to mean for my career in Valorant? Was that something that was going through your head?
Yeah, it was gutting. Like I was pretty crushed to not get it, because especially I felt like I was hard done by. I felt like it was an individual's I guess, view of me that is what made me miss it. I think because around the time when the event was not being run to, you know, high standard, I guess, and that was open to the community discussion to have that, I was outspoken about it. And I think that very much put a hurt in me. So, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about that Twitter and stuff later, and what like having a voice versus being careful of not stepping on the toes of your tournament organizers. That was an interesting dynamic. So I thought I'd definitely fucked it at the start by burning that relationship. But ultimately, I don't think Riot was super happy with the Fortress results. So they moved away and found other stuff. And that's why I guess I managed to get it. So as a result of me having the LPL relationship and being willing to build that relationship from the start, it kind of tipped me on the scale a bit forward of being able to get to tier 1 in Oceania very, very quickly, purely on relationship. And also I did feel like I was pretty good, you know, when it comes to casting Valorant. I do feel good at the play-by-play element, and Komodo slotted in quite well because he loved the game. He got Radiant, so he's, you know, pretty decent at the game too. So I felt like he added a good color dynamic, and it's just worked out for us, really.
Sweet. Yeah, awesome. All right, well, I mean, that's 2020 then in a nutshell, done and dusted. Let's jump forward to 2021, which again, it kind of feels like a bit more of a holding pattern kind of a year, very similar to 2020. Obviously, 2021, we're still kind of deep in the throes of COVID. The vaccines aren't really out just yet, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. So I don't really think there's a whole lot to actually dive into here, regardless of Counter-Strike or for Valorant. The only thing I will say is for Counter-Strike, at the very least, you seem to have kind of got a lot more ESL work. Like 2020 and 2021, it sort of felt like you really solidified yourself in Counter-Strike. Even though there wasn't opportunities, the ones that were there, you kind of were able to kind of make the most of. You seem to be working a lot more with ESL and DreamHack, and even doing these sort of, you know, international, quote-unquote, semi-international, global... I say international. I think I should rephrase, or I think I should clarify here, that I'm talking about when you're working with global. So
yes,
a lot of people won't know. A lot of people who are out there casting won't know, like, oh, who's actually running this broadcast? I talk about ESL Australia running broadcasts. That is a different entity to ESL Global. When I cast for ESL Australia, my contact is a different person to when I talk to ESL Global. They might as well be two different companies. So you had contacts in Australia, you had contacts in Global, you'd kind of solidified that. That looked good for you. Valorant also kind of starts to pop off a little bit, right? You've got the LPL stuff going, but really, I mean, I think at the base level of it, outside of solidifying and locking in all this work and kind of maintaining your position in both CS and Valorant, I don't think 2021's a big year for you.
Nah, it was very much maintenance, 100%. Like, it was literally like building that relationship with ESL Global, being able to be a regular contact. So it wasn't just like me constantly reaching out. It got to a point where still to this day, I maintain that relationship where it's like a qualifying event that ESL Australia is not running might come up and they'll be like, hey, Conky, do you want to do this? It's like, yep, sure. And yeah, so establishing that and maintaining that relationship, working with LPL because obviously they were such a heavy hitter. I was doing some CS with them as well as Valorant. And then obviously, whenever I could do anything for ESL Australia, the opportunity was there too. So it was, yeah, very much a maintenance period, 2021, because the borders didn't open up until March 22. Wasting time.